today we're talking to Daniel Langer. He's the CEO of Équité brands. You are a man of the people, Daniel. So thank you so much for taking the time to be here.
Thank you.
And you have probably the busiest schedule out of anybody that I know, so I really appreciate your time.
Yeah,
Every time
so
you're
much.
here, I just feel honored. So a little bit about Daniel. I'm going to have him get into his story, but you are very fascinating. So you were just recently named top 5 opinion leaders in the world amongst Alessandra Michel from Gucci, Christian Bouchamp of Amazon Fashion, and Bernard Arnault of LVMH, and Daniel Langer. So that is quite a group of people to be named amongst. So that's pretty amazing. I'm very proud of you if you're not proud of yourself. You are regularly featured in Forbes, The Economist, Jing Daily, just to name a few. You can check out his website. Of course, we'll leave all of those tags at the end on all the places you're regularly featured. You're a regular blogger, writer for all these things. And your clients include, these are just some of them, Maserati, Viceroy Hotels, Sotheby's, Ferrari, KitchenAid, and of course, Lash Affair. Clearly, that's why we're here. So today, I want obviously to talk about you, who you are, and we'll get into branding, why branding is important, and how we're changing our story, and little things we're doing at Lash Affair. So I just think you should I'm going to close this. I'm going to let you talk. I want for people to get to know you a little bit better, and just tell them about your story.
Yeah, thank you, Jenelle. Thank you for having me here, and thank you everyone for being live with us today.
Yes.
Where to start? I think what maybe describes me best is that I have a passion to build brands that create more value for people. And so, a lot of, when you Google me or so, very often the connection will be done with luxury. But I always like to think, luxury is not necessarily just about being expensive or being exclusive. It's first and foremost about creating value. And in the extreme, creating extreme value for customers. And so this is what we do every day, what I like to do. And this is also how we met for Lash Affair.
Yes. Yeah, you're an Arizona State alumni?
Yeah, no, I was at...
I know you went to Harvard Business School and all that, but the connection was Lisa.
I was in a couple of business schools, and among others, I did an executive training at Thunderbird a couple of years ago. And Lisa, also here from Lash Affair, was at that same training or at a similar training. And so we connected, then she introduced me to Lash Affair, and then we got introduced once, and then we started to talk about the brand and what can we do with the brand.
I know, I felt an instant connection with you. I was like, wow, it's like, you really just get it. You get me. Even I think before I really got me in the sense of Lash Affair, you're like, I see what you're trying to do here. Let's make this a little bit more easy for people to understand what you're trying to do with your brand. So I remember we met at a panel event.
Yeah, I think you guys were doing an event with I think a couple of Lash artists, and telling your story. And this was the first time that I got involved.
Yeah. So what do you think? What drew you to Lash Affair? Like, what was it about Lash Affair that you were like, all right, I could work with these people? Do you remember?
I think first of all, this is the nice thing when you run your own company, you can choose with whom you work. So, and the connection was mutual. So I also felt that, with you, with Paul, with the entire team, that there was a great connection from the very beginning. But I also thought that we have a huge opportunity in this category, because as so many other categories, we found that if you take eyelash extensions, many companies just do kind of the same things or kind of tell the stories in the same way. And so I think we thought from the very beginning we wanted to really make people understand what we are doing differently. And I think this is how it all started.
Yeah. And I think, I don't think our brand, and I'll be the first person to say this, I don't think our brand messaging was strong before we started working with you, clearly. We didn't have the change your story messaging that we do today, so definitely we're going to talk about that and how we created that, how we got here. But it's, to me, I want to talk about today, like, the importance of branding. Like, what does that even mean? Because I see a lot of branding courses popping up of, take this branding course, and it's usually, to me, it seems like they're only talking about the visual aspects of like these templates and, this font and such. So let's back it up. Like, why is branding important when you work with people and you try to get them to understand the creation?
I think what is extremely important is that we create something that is authentic. And this I think, if I kind of look back how we started working, maybe you remember I think we did this in Phoenix, our branding workshop, where we were sitting together for 2 days with the team. I think the dogs were around, and there was a very, very strong energy among everyone. And that was a moment, for example, where I remember, I think one of the team members asking, what are we allowed to do when we do luxury? And I found this a very interesting question, because I think first and foremost, brands have to be authentic. Because nowadays, I think no one likes anything that does not feel authentic. And to me, authenticity is not something where we can say we are, let's say, 50% authentic or 60%, either we are authentic or not. And so for me, the most important when we build the positioning of brands or working with brands to create their stories, then it's about finding out what this brand is really about. What is it what this brand really does in a different way, so that consumers are drawn to this brand, and to figure this out. And this has to do very much with the what the brand is doing, with the how, but also with the why. What is the purpose of the brand? And how are the people? And so I found very fascinating when we had this workshop, the way how people were talking. We used maybe some more slang words that others would not use. And then we thought, this is actually quite interesting, because this is kind of who we are as a brand. And so why not putting this all into the brand story, into the brand storytelling, into the tone of voice, so that everything feels much more organic than it would be if it's something made up. And I think this is very important, because, as you said, most people, when they think about branding, they think about the logo. And to me, the logo, I don't want to say is the least important, but it's something that comes very, very late in the process.
We didn't even talk about.
I think we almost never talked about it, because it's not important, but I think other things are so much more important.
Sure, that's a good way to say it.
The logo.
Yeah. And so it was more about the feeling. So going through this workshop, and it's funny that you say, do I remember it? I remember it like it was yesterday, because I remember, for me as the founder, that exercise was really challenging. Like, it was like simple questions that should have simple answers, but they're complicated answers. Who are you? It's like, oh, okay. You think that would just be, stuff that would just be coming out of my mouth, and I was like, who are we? That's a great question. So I think that exercise is just really having those honest conversations with yourself about, what am I doing here? What am I providing for people? And with your direction, we came up with the Change Your Story, which now to me is like all I think about. It's not like, of course, the packaging, that stuff is fun. That is part of the job, and I do really enjoy that, but it's the feeling that you're giving somebody. So for instance, we have the studio, and this is really what anyone in the lash industry is doing. It's that moment that the client opens their eyes, and that they have that, what we call the Lashgasm, right? But that's that moment. That's what we're bottling up and selling to people at the end of the day, whether it's, through the lash artist, and then they sell the client that service. But that is what we do here. We change people's stories by empowering them through their lashes. Yeah. And I don't know why it just never clicked for me before. Well, like, I know what we do. I was a lash artist before. The reason why I have Lash Affair is because of that feeling. It was always driving me. But I guess I just didn't have, I don't know, I just didn't think of to put that in the forefront of what we do.
I think it's normal. We see this all the time. And it has very much to do that when we start a company, typically we are very busy. and we focus on the obvious. So I think in your case, you were selling all kind of supplies for lashes, probably doing this better than most others, and you also were doing training for lash artists. So you had basically a couple of things, and so the logical thing is in the beginning of a business, which most companies are doing, is to simply describe what you're doing. The issue with this is, to your point, others are doing maybe similar things too. So how can we describe even more precisely what we are doing? And what is very important, obviously, is always the emotional connection that we do, because as humans, as people, we are always drawn to a certain emotion. And if we cannot bring our emotion across that we have as a company, that we have as a brand, then we kind of miss an opportunity. So I think in the very beginning of this process, the most important was to find out what is the Lash Affair emotion? What is it that we are really doing, and where are we probably performing better than everyone else on the planet? What is this one thing? And then when we basically saw this moment where we achieved the transformation of our customers, this is the moment that is basically our moment that where everything counts. When the person who is with the lash artist opens their eyes and looks in the mirror and sees their transformation. And I think then the celebration of this moment, and to highlight this moment, and to make people feel good about this moment, and also to feel an anticipation for the next moment, this is very, very critical.
I love that moment. I can speak personally. At like days where I get my touch-ups, I just walk a little different. I open my eyes, I'm like, there you are. Like been missing out on my true self, I should say. So yeah, I think that's, speaking about authenticity, right, where I think that maybe before, I think we weren't talking like how we wanted to talk, or, kind of being afraid of like, oh, is this going to be too much for people? Or I don't know. So that definitely has been huge for me in that transformational process of like letting go of some of that, of like, all right, you can't be so worried about what are people going to think, because there's always going to be people that don't like what you do. So you kind of have to just let that go and just be yourself, be authentic, say it the way you want to say it. And there's some people like it, or don't like it, they don't like it. And most people that stick with you, love what you do, and that's like your core audience, right? So cater to them.
I think we are almost always the most powerful if we just be ourselves.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more, and I learned that when we used to do trade shows, like at IBS, the big Vegas trade shows every year. It would be usually in June, and we would be there for a couple days, and the common thread or the feedback that we would get from people is that, oh my God, I love what you guys are doing over here. You guys are so real. And it just would be this ongoing thing. And I was like, well, how are people acting at these other booths? Like, I don't think we're doing anything outrageous. We were just having like real conversations, speaking to them how I would normally speak. Sometimes I swear, sometimes I don't. It's just whatever's natural. And I think that made people feel comfortable, because it's like people can feel when you're not being yourself, or you go over to a booth and you're like, how are you doing today, ma'am? Or like, come
exactly
on. You would just be like, what's up, how's your day going? That to me, I would respond better to that. So I've learned that very quickly, is just being authentic is what people like, right? You got to give them what they want.
And I think this is important also for brands and everyone maybe out there that thinks about their own brands. It's to have tough conversations. When we remember when we built all the storytelling about Lash Affair, we asked the tough questions. Who are we?
Yeah.
It's the toughest question to answer. Yeah? And how do we want to be seen? What difference do we make to the world? And very often brands talk just about themselves. So they say, we do this the best, we do that the best. But what they often forget to do is to think, what are they actually doing for their customers? And what are they enabling customers to do differently than without them? And very often, when we audit brands, very often the answer is they don't do things really in a different way. And that's a problem.
Yeah.
And because if this is basically the outcome, and the brands are not changing, then they will never be successful.
Yeah, and I think that that's hard. Again, that's a tough question. As a brand owner, you'd be like, oh shit, we're really not making a difference. We do really sound like everyone else. But if that is the case and if that's where you are, I just feel like it's never too late to change your story. Sit down with your team, huddle up, and be like, how can we do better today? And just move forward.
Yeah.
So I don't think being down about it or feeling bad or feeling that if you didn't start it already, you're behind. It's just, I never like to compare our journey to anyone else's because we're all at different starting points. We all have different goals. So I think that comparison game is definitely one that should not be played.
No, and
right? Just do your own thing.
Absolutely. And the other thing is, I think where tough questions come in is also about business models and about, what are we really doing? So I can share, I wrote a quite provocative article, I think it was out last week, about the watch industry. And I don't know, for whatever reason today I put one of my maybe nicer watches on, but typically I'm using the Apple Watch.
Yeah, you said that to me.
Yeah, I think I sent you this article. And the article was very provocative in a way that I was saying the Apple Watch is responding to a big mega trend better than any other watch. And this mega trend is health. And I think we are also going to speak about sustainability today. But
yes.
What we see through the pandemic is that people are very concerned about health. Not only, let's say, physical health, but also mental health. But health is a huge concern. And, I think through the probably history of mankind, everyone was always dieting. Everyone tried to kind of be in maybe a little bit in a better shape than our starting position, so to speak. So these things just became much accelerated through the pandemic. And there's an interesting observation. So if you look at smartwatches, and the Apple Watch is one of them, they have more and more sensors. These sensors tell us, do we exercise enough? Do we move enough? They remind us maybe once an hour that to walk around a little bit, to breathe, and so on and so forth. And
does it cover your sleep, like how you slept the night before?
You can also
I don't have an Apple Watch.
You can also measure your sleep with it.
It's
and
valuable.
The more functions that come and the more sensors these watches get, the more people are going to use them. And it's very interesting because this is a company that was in many other businesses, but not in watches. In the last 5 or 6 years, this company became the number one watchmaker in the world. So today they sell more watches than any other company before. And so, for example, my article was about this, and I was writing that if I was managing a more traditional watch brand, I would be nervous right now. Yeah. Because if the health trend is continuing and connected watches give more options, then maybe people are going to use less of finer watches than before. So there has to be an answer if you're in this kind of business. And the interesting thing is, obviously watches are a very emotional topic. I think I got probably about 30 or 40 mails of people, even sometimes I don't want to say harassing me, but telling me, okay, you have no idea, and
that your opinion is shit. Yeah,
a watch is different.
What do you know?
A fine watch is different than an Apple Watch, and so on. And I said, okay, thank you very much. I know that. But what is interesting is people tend, and companies very often tend to stay within what they know, and when things change around them, then in the beginning, almost everyone says, okay, it will not affect us. It will only affect others. And then the change right now is so fast that if we are not anticipating how consumer trends are changing, how consumer sentiment is changing, we may be out of business very fast.
Sure.
And so this is kind of this watch example, I think, is a good example for any brand in any category. Never feel safe enough. Brands should never feel that things cannot change around them, or that what they do is the best and people will always come. No, things can change.
Yeah.
And if we are not anticipating those change and those trends, and also anticipating what newer customers, for example, younger customers want in terms of their experiences, we will not be relevant for them.
Yeah.
Very simple.
That's a big takeaway for me. You always talk about Gen Z every time we're together. It always comes back to them because they are the future consumer, right?
They're the future
You said
consumer.
they make up, what, 50, 60% of the market?
Not yet. So right now, Gen Z, typically, depending on who you ask, but the majority of people or experts will probably say that Gen Z is today below 25. And so, for example, I have a 17-year-old daughter, she would be a Gen Z. And so you can obviously now run the numbers. If we basically look at the population below 25, these will not yet be the majority of consumers. Simply doesn't work this way. However, they're the most influential customer group because we typically don't look to our parents for inspiration. We look to our children for inspiration or to younger people for inspiration. So what a 16-year-old, 17-year-old, 20-year-old likes today is definitely going to influence someone who is 35 years old or 40 years old, and even more so someone who is maybe 50 or 60 years old. And so they may not use the same clothes and the same styles, but the mindset that a Gen Z has is already disrupting entire industries.
Yeah.
And I would say one of the biggest changes that Gen Zs bring in there are twofold. The first is they are non-compromising in terms of experiences. So if they don't like something, they will experience it one, and then they will turn around and they never come back. So they are the toughest customers to please, so to speak. And the second is it's the first generation that walks the talk in relation to sustainability.
I think that this is a great thing. It's a little scary, obviously, if you're a brand owner. You're like, all right, we better get our ass in gear because now these consumers are going to be the majority of the market, right? Because you're saying they make up 25% now, but what about in another 10 to 15 years? That their way is going to be the standard, I'm assuming.
Yeah,
right?
so,
if they're
so
not going
right,
to be accepting anything less.
So right now, depending where we are, so if, for example, here in the US or in North America, Gen Z customers right now for most luxury brands will be maybe around 5, 6, 7% of the sales. Depending, some younger brands may over-skew with them, but let's say around 5, 6%. In Asia, particularly in China, in one of the youngest markets, we already have about 15% Gen Z customers. So they're quite significant in terms of spending. And by 2030, so we have 9 years to go, by 2030, they will be the largest customer group for any brand, and particularly also for luxury brands. So I would estimate that probably about maybe 30%, 35% of all luxury consumption by 2030 will be Gen Z.
Wow.
And millennials right now are about this 35% mark, 40% mark. And if you take now millennials, so those under 40 plus Gen Zs, in 9 or 10 years, they will be by far the biggest customer group combined. And as I said, to me, the biggest difference to any other generation before is Gen Z walk the talk when it comes to sustainability. In other words,
give us some examples of that.
Yeah, if you cannot convince them, they will move on. And examples are, for example, this is something that really happened now in the last year during the pandemic. I have some anecdotes from, let's say, can not share the brand, but a luxury fashion brand told me that during the pandemic, there where they were able to sell, a lot of their customers, especially their youngest customers, came in over the last maybe 8-9 months, came into the stores and very specifically wanted to know where the leathers are coming from, how the manufacturing conditions are, and so on and so forth. And the store staff of this particular brand, they were not prepared for these answers. So they obviously knew something, and they also were reassured that the brand is sustainable, or maybe using some of the most sustainable practices, but they couldn't give precise answers. And then what happened is that a lot of their customers, especially the young customers, would turn around and say, "Thank you very much. If you cannot give me the answer, I'm not going to buy your handbag."
Nice.
And this is something that never happened before. Before, customers maybe would ask, but if they kind of just get the kind of okayish answer, they would still maybe buy. Now it doesn't work this way anymore.
Yeah.
And I think this is, to me, one of the biggest advices that I can give brands is if sustainability is just a marketing kind of a
Ploy.
marketing toy, a marketing ploy, this will not work anymore. The elder customers, they would maybe fall for this. The youngest customers, they will do their homework. And if they are not convinced, if we cannot give them facts and figures, what we are really doing, and if we are not basically really, instead of using buzzwords, being very, very precise with what we are doing, then a lot of brands will not make it over the next couple of years.
I like that. I respect that.
Yeah.
For a number of reasons. Obviously, when it comes to animals, I'm a huge advocate for animal welfare. I think farming could do better. We could do better. I don't think we should sacrifice or make animals suffer for our enjoyment. I get that they have to be part of the food system. I get that we use them for handbags. But if it's okay, yes, so if that's the choice that we're going to make, I don't think they should have to suffer every step of the way. So I think if this next generation of kids is going to really, put their stake in the ground and say, you know what, that's it. We're not buying. We're putting our dollars where our mouth is. I love that. That's music to my ears. And I think that we're a lot more powerful, I think, than we think, right? Where it's like every time you spend money, you're voting with your dollar. So the better decisions that you can make and shop with brands that are doing better, I think I love that.
Yeah.
So,
and we are doing actually some sustainability projects for brands. And for me, the most interesting is that once you take a conscious decision to say, let's not do marketing anymore with this, let's have very specific targets and let's do very specific actions, then this can really become a source of inspiration and a source of innovation.
Yeah.
And I think this is the big difference, because brands that just talk about sustainability, typically you will find that on somewhere on the website like 10 or 15 things they do, and it will be just reading like blah 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 what everyone else is saying. And brands that take it serious and say, for example, I don't know, let's say every new product they launch has to be more sustainable than the product that it replaces, then you have to really start thinking. Then you have to think about different materials, different solutions. And I think the other very interesting thing is, in the majority of projects that we see or cases that we see today, brands are just thinking very defensive, meaning let's avoid some bad materials. This is very important, but that's only one thing. The other thing is it maybe possible, coming back to what I said earlier, that everything should be about extreme value creation, is it actually possible to do something that creates really extreme value through sustainability? So it's not just to do what everyone else is doing, but to really innovate around that.
I think that, again, all great things, and I think why it's scary for people, because it makes it harder. Right.
It makes it harder.
It makes it a lot harder. So I think that's why people are like, oh, maybe I want to do this, but it's harder to commit maybe fully. I can speak for Lash Affair. We took your sustainability workshop, if you want to call it. I learned so much from that about plastics, different materials, why one would be able to be recycled versus another, and that was very eye-opening. So even just from that one thing, and we're not perfect. Never am I ever saying that we are, and it's definitely an ongoing process, but we're committing to making changes along the way. For our shipping boxes, we completely changed the materials of that because we found out that some of them weren't as recyclable. So we definitely changed and went with a different option. So I think that in the past, for me, that was something that I didn't want to do, because I didn't want to sacrifice the way something looked. But for me now, I'd want to be better. I don't want to just be like, oh, it looks pretty and we're kind of sustainable. But I think for me, that's, I don't know, maybe it was after the workshop that we took with you, it really it resonated with me that it's our responsibility as a brand to set the example and be inspiring for other people.
Yeah, and I feel like if we are open, also, let's say if you take a decision that is a much more sustainable solution, and I don't know, maybe a product doesn't look as fancy as it looked before, if we talk about it, and if we explain exactly why we do certain things, I personally think that there is almost no customer that is going to not buy just because maybe something is not as colorful as it was, as long as we explain
exactly
things. And because what very often happens is that under this kind of name of sustainability, so many unsustainable things have been done, and you will not find any brand today that is not talking somewhere about sustainability. So that I always feel it's really important to explain what we are doing, why we are doing it, and also what is the result of what we are doing.
Yeah. One major thing too, which I learned from the workshop, again, you're like, it's not so much always about materials, right? It's a bigger conversation of like sourcing in general. Where do you get your products from? Because remember, we're shipping them over. That's has an impact on the environment. How are the raw materials getting here in the first place?
Exactly.
So we started making new relationships with manufacturing in the United States. So some of our products that were actually, 2 of them have launched, the sprays. Those are made in the United States, and we actually opted to not do exterior packaging at all. We're like, here's the decision. Do we take the box real estate and put all the facts about the product, or do we do a QR code that brings them to this beautiful video where I talk about all the benefits and stuff? So we opted for that. So it's just, we didn't have the pretty box, but at the end of the day, it makes me feel good about what we're doing here as a brand, and I hope that people follow suit. So yeah, it's a big one. Do you feel like, where I know you do have so many international clients as well as domestic, do you feel as though that's really important to people now, more so than ever, that stuff is made in the United States?
I think it always depends on the market. I think that probably for American customers, or especially customers here from the United States, things that are made in the United States always carried a certain value. And so I think that's for sure. I think maybe what I personally think is maybe almost a bit more important is what you said before, is that we think in an intelligent way around where do we produce things. Because as a brand, you're probably not only selling in the United States, but also internationally. And so it's kind of very simple, but if a raw material basically travels the entire world to go to the factory, and then the product travels from the factory to a second place, maybe a distribution center that is somewhere else, and then the product travels from the distribution center again to all places all over the world, probably it's not the best footprint that can be done. Yeah. So, and these are always things that need to be taken into consideration, and also again be very transparent about them, why certain decisions are taken and what is the impact of those decisions.
Yeah, I think I think that's something that has been top of mind over here for really the last couple of months, since we're actually going through just like all this revamp. So it's actually perfect timing for us. Now, do you think that people are willing to pay more for items that are sustainable? Because I know with that, in our exploration, like usually those items or packaging or whatever, that option is usually the more expensive option. So obviously those costs typically tend to be passed off to the consumer on some level, right? So do you think that people are willing to spend more knowing that something was sustainably sourced or made from 100% recyclable materials, or that whole?
To me, I would say yes, but it depends on the ability to make the value transparent. And in a sense, it's very simple. We all will pay for the value that a product or brand creates. It's very simple. So if basically I see a product and I feel it's worth to pay, let's say $20 for this product, then if the price is $20, I'm going to buy it. If the price is $30, I'm not going to buy it. So what is very important is that we, in a sense, that we do good things and talk about it, but also importantly that there is value for the customer. And what I would say happened in the past quite often was that products that were more sustainable often were maybe a compromise. So they maybe the performance was not as good as the less sustainable version was, and so on and so forth. And this is typically something that no one likes. I don't like to buy something that is less effective on something.
Sure.
I don't want to buy a product that, I don't know, smells less good than another one. So the very first task always is, especially when we speak about premium and luxury products, is to create a premium or luxury experience. And so as long as we can do that, and then we can on top convince our customers that what we do is very thought through in terms of sustainability, then I'm convinced that people are going to buy more sustainable products always.
So again, it ties right back into the branding, the messaging.
It's always about the value.
The creation, or the value creation, which is, it's all tied in. So it's like if you have a weak link on one of those areas, it might be harder for you to communicate your sustainability message. Yeah. So it's about getting it really tuned up here at the top.
Yeah, we can basically say in a very simple way, if we create something boring and it's super sustainable, why should someone buy it? Or if we create something super exciting, but it's not sustainable at all, also why should someone buy it? So the art is to do things that are super exciting on one hand, create a lot of value, and at the same time are as sustainable as they can be. And then also to be very clear about why did we do certain choices? Why did we choose the ingredients that we choose? Why do we choose the materials that we choose? And so on and so forth. And then the other thing that we must not forget is the consumers. How do consumers use the product? Because in many product categories, the actual use also is driving a lot of unsustainable behavior, so to speak. So if you think about, let's say, anything that has to do with washing.
Give me an example of that.
The higher the temperature is of water, the less sustainable things are. And the longer we use water, the less sustainable it is, because we waste water, so to speak. And also the use of products, the way how products are consumed, also need to be taken into consideration. And if there are options where we can, for example, if a product needs water, where we can reduce the water usage in use, then this product also will be more sustainable. So we have to think much more, I would say, in terms of solutions that are not just about the product, but to what we discussed before, has the production in mind, but also the consumer in mind and the consumer use in mind.
It's a new world. I love to see we're changing. So would you say, out of all the brands that you work with, would you say like all of them are taking these steps? Like high level, because you have some. Work with some prestigious brands.
I would say that right now, no brand anymore, at least no brand that we work with, is not taking sustainability serious.
Good.
Obviously, certain categories may be more challenging than others to achieve goals, and some brands are maybe much more advanced because maybe they started earlier or they put more ambitious goals than others are. But I'm convinced that in the end of the day, also the different purchase behavior and buying behavior of the Generation Z that we just mentioned, this is going to be ultimately what will convince, because if people vote with their wallets, then this is always the message that brands understand best.
That's perfect. I love to hear that. What do you think is the number one trend right now as far as like luxury goes? Because I read your articles regularly, right? So I feel like I know what you're kind of gonna say because I like keep up with you. But what would you say as far as like what you're seeing? What it can be good or bad? What do you think that people are doing right now?
So when we look at
caution people to not do. Maybe?
Yeah. So when we look at consumer trends and expectations of consumers, a couple of things stand out. So the first thing, maybe for all of us to kind of remind us, is we are living in times that are in many ways unprecedented. And I'm not just talking about COVID and what we went through over the last year or so, But even if you just think about technology immersion, how much technology we are using as consumers and how our decisions are kind of shaped by technology. There's never been a time when it was like it is right now.
It's crazy.
If you think about your phone, you could think about your phone not just as a phone, but it's in principle a tool where your brain is connected to the cloud. And so we use maybe still our fingers and our eyes to read what is on the screen and to type things in. But in principle, it's an extension of the brain into the cloud. And there's a very interesting podcast on the Rogan show with Elon Musk that I would recommend everyone to watch, the last one, where he talks about his artificial intelligence ventures.
The Neuralink,
and it's really fascinating.
Yeah.
And where he also speaks about that in principle, if you fast forward, we are going to be even more connected with the cloud, so to speak. And now it's the fingers, and the fingers are relatively slow in terms of typing. And in a couple of years, maybe this will be brain implants that are going to help us to communicate with the cloud. But whether this comes in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 years, for sure at one stage it will come. And what we see is our life is so much more driven by technology. So this now has a couple of very, very strong consequences. The first one is, how do we choose products? Completely different than it was even 5 years ago. Today, 95% of all consumption choices, especially also in luxury, are done, or the choice is basically determined through the digital journey. So this means if we buy, let's say, a handbag, a new car, anything of value, you're not just going to walk in randomly into a store and then take your decision there. The decision you already made.
Yeah. And
the decision you made through social media, through internet, you will have done your homework before you go into the store. And sometimes I like to say in a store or in any place where you get a physical experience, the only thing a brand can do now is to mess it up.
Yeah.
Because the decision is already taken.
Yeah. It's very true.
No one will walk into the store and they did not fundamentally already decided to buy something. And this is a fundamentally different world than in the world we lived just 5 years ago. And because it means that as a brand, now also talking about brands, we have to convince customers digitally before they even buy.
That makes so much sense.
Before we called the moment, I remember when I went to business school, we called the shelf the moment of truth. The moment of truth was always, you are in front of the shelf, will you grab the product or not? Will you put it in your cart or not?
Moment of truth, I'd like that.
This was the moment of truth. Was the physical moment when you were in the store, you put it in your cart or you don't put it in your cart.
Okay.
These times are over. The moment of truth is before. And if basically as we are all surrounded by competitors, if those competitors do things in a smarter way than we do, if they connect better with the same customer that we also serve, what are they going to do? They're not going to buy from us. They're going to buy from the competition. They will not even consider us.
Right.
And so sometimes I say it's a completely new game when it comes to luxury. And it's not just a digital game in terms of point of sales and selling online. It's a completely new game in terms of connecting with customers, convincing customers, interacting with the customers. And I think this is maybe one of the biggest changes is even 4, 5, 6 years ago, brands were typically relatively closed. And the only interaction you had with a brand was through purchasing something. You walked through the doors, and if you think about luxury, then typically it would be almost like a ceremony and maybe even a little bit intimidating to go into a luxury store and so on.
Would you like some champagne?
Yeah, would you like some
walk in.
champagne? Yeah, and now it's different. Now everything is transparent. And before, if a brand is not transparent, maybe still 2021 they can survive somehow. 2025 they will be dead.
Well, I think social media really exacerbated that. So now it's like everyone's basically is like a movie producer. Everyone's almost expected to show the behind the scenes, show more of your story. So yeah, I could see why that would be unacceptable for people to not do. Yeah.
And this obviously all has now huge consequences. So one interesting thing is, again, just think 5 years from now, 5 years ago, we had very, very few authorities that were guiding us. So if you wanted to buy something in fashion, what would you do? You go to maybe Vogue or Elle and you see what are the latest fashion trends. And if you wanted to go on a trip, you would go to, I don't know, Condé Nast Traveler, or if you wanted to decorate your home, you would go to Architectural Digest. So you had very, very few magazines, typically, that would basically shape the way how we think, how we feel, how our aesthetics are, where we travel to, and so on and so forth. And because there were very few gatekeepers, there were also relatively few brands, and those brands tended to do things in a relatively similar way, because you had to go through those gatekeepers.
Makes so much sense when you think about it.
What is happening right now is, instead of having, I don't know, 10, 20, 30 gatekeepers, we have 20,000 gatekeepers. So, and whether these are huge influencers or maybe micro-influencers that only have maybe a couple of few followers, but those followers really follow very, very strongly. It doesn't really matter whether whether they're big or small, but each influencer may have their own style. They have their own following. And some influencers may like one style, another influencer likes another style. So what we see is, we see many more brands that express themselves in a much different way. And because of this, again, what becomes so important is that we have clarity on who we are as a brand. Which emotion do we want to convey? Because if we are not clear about that, we will not be interesting for any of the influencers, and also not for any of the customers. So this entire, what I find interesting is that this strong digitization that we find actually is a huge booster for emotion. Because we sometimes may think digital means less emotion. I would argue digital means dramatically more emotion. The other thing that I feel it gets more important is, as we are all spending more time in front of screens, we are much more discerning what happens when we are not in front of a screen. And we now really take physical experiences so much more serious. Before, you would just go maybe in a store, and I don't know, if they would not treat you well, what would you do? You would come back next time. And you would come back next time because there's lack of alternatives.
Yeah, right.
So now they do this once, you will never come back.
So true.
And then you will write about it, probably.
Yeah.
And you will tell everyone about it.
It's very true.
And so the more premium something is, the more luxury it is, because it should create more value, the more upset we will be with experiences that are not good. And if we are upset with an experience that is not good, what are we going to do? We're going to tell everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we will make sure that this business is out of business.
Yeah.
Until our last drop, almost.
Yeah.
And so this is so interesting, because the digital experiences, or the this kind of growing nature of digital experiences, means the physical experience has to become dramatically better than it is today.
Yeah. Because people are so particular about how they spend their time, because everyone's so stuck behind a screen all the time. That makes a lot of sense, and I think that that's why you're voted a top opinion leader, is because you really tap into the psychology about how what drives people, that moment of truth. Well, where does that decision making come from? That's what you tap into. Right, and that's what's really interesting.
And to me, it's in a sense very simple, because if we don't understand these changes and these behavioral changes and how preferences are built, we cannot really build strategies that are winning.
Yeah.
And that's the only thing that works, because if our business strategy is not winning, we will be out of business. Very simple. Yeah. And the other thing that we see is, and this is also a huge change, is that real estate is much less important than it was before. This was another gatekeeper. So if you wanted to build a huge brand in the past, you had to be in a lot of cities, you had to open a lot of physical places and locations, And especially when you were in luxury, you had to be in the best shopping streets in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah. But how much, if you think about, I don't know, Rodeo Drive in Los Angeles, how much space is on Rodeo Drive? I don't know, I never counted them, but you can maybe open 100 stores there,
Sure.
maybe less, I don't know. Let's say 100, you cannot put 150 stores there. So there is a limited amount of stores and brands that were able to play in a specific field just a couple of years ago. This is why we saw for maybe 50, 60, 70 years always the same brands being the big brands. Because there was basically the other big gatekeeper, not just the magazines or so, but also the real estate. And this gatekeeper now is completely gone.
Yeah.
So you can build today a brand completely online. You don't need to have any real estate anymore if you are radical in that aspect. And there are a couple of brands that are doing this very successfully, or with maybe just 1 or 2 or 3 experience locations, and the rest is all done completely online. And this means now, you mentioned social media becomes the new real estate.
Yeah.
It becomes the new real estate investment, and the presence on social media is basically your brand presence.
Yeah, there's so many lash artists that message me, and how do they grow their clientele, or how do I get more popular in the area locally with people, because there's so many lash artists. You'd be surprised how many people I talk to that don't actually have a website. Because I know social media is important for sure, 100%. But I think not having a website is a mistake, right? Because ultimately, you know, what do we know? Most people change, things change. What's popular today might not be popular tomorrow, where it used to be Facebook, now it's Instagram, now it's TikTok. Like, we're gonna keep evolving, right? So if you're only the Facebook group, that's not great. So you have to really have your own stuff, because really at the end of the day, what if Instagram would disappear and you only had your presence there? So it's like, to be able to make sure that you're diversified is really important.
I think you need to be there. Your point is, you need to be there where your audience is.
Yeah.
And this requires now a couple of things. The first thing is, especially when I look at, since we work together, obviously I'm following a lot of lash artists. So, and I would say the number one thing I realize is also, when I look at most lash artists, they all do the same thing. So they show a picture of, close-up of the eye with the lashes they did.
Yeah.
So if you have now 50 or 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 lash artists and their Instagram looks the same, why should any customer come to them?
Yeah.
So also, even for, when someone is a single lash artist, or maybe one person company, or 3 or 4, 5 people, you have to think who you are as a brand.
Yeah.
What is the specific value that someone as a person brings? And then everything that is communicated on social media has to be communicated around these specifics. And it doesn't mean not to show sometimes the close-up of the eyelashes. But if this is the only thing that someone shows, then there's no differentiation.
Yeah, there's no emotional connection.
There's no emotional connection.
So
this is very important to also, for independent of the size of a business, to understand who are we as a business.
I think that often people are a little bit afraid to put themselves on there. Or we used to teach, this is like 10 years ago, and it's really has changed so much. When we first started the company, it'd be like, all right, you have your personal account and you have your business account, where I almost feel like those things are one and the same now, because people want to see more about the artists themselves. So do you recommend that, having a separate account where like business and personal, or do you think having like one and just showing, and I think that there's like limits to that too. Like if I'm not going to show my food every night, right? That gets a little weird. It's like, okay, within reason.
I think that depends a little bit on, I think, each person. I think I don't know if there's necessarily the general rule about that. I just feel maybe what we said before, whether this is now the company account or it's a personal account, or someone has both, or someone has it connected, it has to be authentic. I think that people start to sense, especially again younger customers, they start to sense if something is made up. And our social media life is always a curated life. So there is some kind of curation that always happens. But I feel like this curation has to be in a way that it is a reflection of the person. Yeah. And if it's not a reflection of the person, then it will not be relevant.
So keep it real.
Exactly.
Is what you're saying. So I like that advice, because it isn't a one size fits all. So within reason, I personally struggle sometimes with that. It's just like with the direction that we're going with our social media presence, I'm definitely jumping on the camera more and more, and I'm getting used to it. But before I didn't do that as much. I would just be in my office all day, just working, and I'm like, I know that I'm so busy in there, but it's like, people don't know what I'm doing in there. So I've definitely embraced that for sure. So if you're somebody that's a little nervous to do that, just practice and get used to it, because it definitely gets better. So back to sustainability. Earth Day is tomorrow. I've been seeing so many people already posting about Earth Day and all of what we're doing. Now, obviously, if you don't have a big brand, you don't have to deal with packaging. Some of these things aren't important to you. But do you have any advice on just maybe like a smaller level as to like, if you have, say if you're a lash artist and you're just a one-woman show, you have a little salon suite, is there something that somebody like that can just immediately start doing today, tomorrow?
I think for me personally, I always found that the idea that everything we do should be more sustainable than what we did in the past. I think this is something that is a very simple rule, and it's a rule that almost everyone can apply in the bigger or in the smaller. So obviously, this is, if you develop a new product, then the new product should be more sustainable than the product that it replaces. But you can now think about the same about your services. How can we also introduce something that does a difference today versus what we did yesterday? And sometimes it can be something really small. And it will be very individual to everyone. But just to have this idea that we can do today something that is maybe better for the world than what we did yesterday. And then just continue doing. And then all those actions will add up at one stage.
I love that, because I feel like most people, it's kind of like the out of sight, out of mind, or like, I'm just one person, what I do doesn't matter, it's everyone else's problem. Do you feel like that? I feel like that's often a theme of like, oh, I don't recycle, it's just me. But if everybody has that attitude, it's like, where does that leave the world, right? So I think everybody has to be responsible for just putting that work in and making that effort. So
I think we can always every one of us can make a difference and our choices will make a difference. And what I shared before about this fashion brand, that people turn around and don't buy, that definitely they noticed, and that made them think. And this means there will be actions that they will do in the future of maybe educating their staff better on certain things, but also probably to be even more precise in terms of what they do in sustainability. So also not making choices. If we are not convinced about a brand and in terms of their sustainability efforts, we can always decide not to buy them. And I think this is very important, because what we do will always have consequences. And in the small, yes, as one person, maybe there's only so much what someone can do. But if we combine our efforts, so this means now 10 people go in one direction and then 100 people go in one direction, then change happens.
Change your story.
Change your story.
Yeah, so I feel like we could talk forever, which we usually always do, but we just got the wrap-up signal. I'd love to have you back on the podcast again
anytime.
to talk more about what you do and branding. I learned so much from you. I just want more people to get to know you. I don't want to be greedy with my time with you. I just feel like I feel bad for people that don't know you, is basically what I'm trying to say.
Thank you so much.
I know we didn't get time to it today, but maybe we could talk about this next time. This really shows the value of like thinking outside of the box, and just because it was done this way, one way for so long, doesn't mean that that's going to work in the future. But the story that you told when you were living your time in Japan, when you were working for, was it L'Oreal?
Was Henkel.
Henkel.
Mm.
But that story to me was so powerful. And I think about it all the time, how you just brought these radical new ideas, and it really was so impactful for the company. So anyways, maybe we could talk about that next time. But I just want to encourage people to be authentic, be who you are, live your truth, because what's the point, right? Everyone's just pretending that they're somebody that they're not. So I don't feel like there's any joy in that.
I think it's one of the toughest decisions often, because I think that intuitively almost everyone feels that we have to fit in to something, we have to comply with maybe some expectations or some things that others have about us. And then, you look back 10 years, 20 years later and see life has gone by, and maybe, someone has not been living to what their true potential is or what they really want to do. And I personally always find people much more interesting that are authentic, that have an opinion, that are not afraid to speak up their truth or speak their truth. So I don't know, it's also maybe encouragement from my side, if you be who you are.
Yeah.
In a very simple way. And sometimes it means also to, do some soul searching to understand who people are, because very often what we see similar to brands that we work with that often don't know in the beginning of the process who they really are. Obviously also a lot of people are searching for who they are, but these are again the tough questions that maybe just sit down on a weekend and just ask the question, who am I?
Yeah.
And then try to write down all the aspects that come to mind. And I always feel like maybe the best advice I can give is, and works the same when we do this for companies or with people, is I always feel like where you feel you get most energy from.
Yes.
This is basically what your destiny is.
Mm-hmm.
And there may be certain things that are not so obvious, but if people really look into themselves and see certain situation in which they feel completely energized, in which they feel completely at one with themselves, then in principle, if they do more of this, then their life will be just more pleasant.
Yeah, like lean into that, lean into what makes you happy, right? Life is just so short, and I think that, if you're interested in having a brand, I could tell you right now, if you're not doing something that you're passionate about, you just won't continue to do it for that long. So I think being happy along the way is, to me, the most important. Right, like that's the value for you. It's just enjoying what you're doing, and people will enjoy being around you more often too.
And I think there is a couple of things that, especially for maybe people who want to build a business, that are extremely important. Is to your point, first you have to kind of find your passion. Find these, and maybe passion can be translated with where do you get most energy. And then the second is you have to be very, very committed to do the hard work. Because sometimes I find sometimes funny, I just had the other day on a video conference a client that said, "Oh, we want to have your life." And then I said, "Okay, my life is 12 hours behind the computer and in meetings. There's very little fancy things about that. Because if you want to be successful, you have to work hard. You have to put the extra hours in. And there's never a day. I don't know. For me, it's most weekends I'm working.
Sure.
I don't even know when was the last time I had like something that I would really call a vacation. And I'm not complaining about it, but this is what people I think have to be aware of, that there is a lot of work that has to be put in. And then maybe the last advice there, or maybe two more. One is you have to advertise what you're doing. To your point that you said before, if someone is just doing the best thing in the world, but they do it for themselves in a closed room and no one in the world knows about it, then it's pretty much useless, or it's not creating value.
What I was doing for like 5 years.
It's not creating value, if we are not going out to the world and telling people about it. So we have to be also quite outspoken about what we do, and self-confident about what we do. And then I think for me personally, this was the biggest advice, is ignore a lot of the people who give you advice.
Yes.
And
yes.
And especially because you never really know why they are doing this. Maybe they have very different passions, so they will never understand why someone is passionate for something. So if you ask someone who has a completely different passion to give you advice on what you want to do with your passion, what do we even expect them to tell us?
Exactly.
And the other thing, what we never really know is, and this is something that I had to learn sometimes even the hard way, is not always do people who give you advice have your best intention in mind. And this is something that we often underestimate, because we often go to people who we think have our best intentions in mind. And if I had listened to everyone that told me not to start my company, I would never have done it.
People told me not to do Lash Affair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would say there were probably more people that advised me against doing what I'm doing than people who supported me in doing that. And I think both is important. You want to have all kind of directions, but in the end, you have to take a decision, and this decision has to follow the passion and has to follow the heart.
Yeah, because most people don't feel your passion, right? So people, I think, are often led by fear, right? They're like, oh, Daniel, why would you leave a job, this stable job at L'Oreal, to go start your own thing that's completely unknown? To somebody, that is crazy. But to you, you're like, no, I have purpose and I know what I'm doing here. So you're definitely an example. Me too. I had people say, oh my God, you're crazy, don't do that. They don't say that now. They say, oh my God, I want your life. Where I'm like, okay, first of all, entrepreneurship is not sexy. Now it's like, for some reason now, that's like the trendiest thing, is to like talk about entrepreneurship and how sexy it is, where like people say to you, oh my God, your life. And you're like, I work all the time. So it's one of those things where it's like, just be honest with yourself. And if it is something that you want to do, and just don't let anybody tell you no. But at the same time, if you're kind of on the fence, I don't think you're going to make it. Yeah.
Exactly.
I don't think you're going to want to wake up day in and day out and be like, I kind of like doing this. Like,
no,
so that all has to come together in this beautiful, harmonious.
The moment you go
storm.
for something, I always feel it has to be all in or nothing.
Yeah.
There cannot be a plan B. The plan B has to be, I always like to say there has to be a plan B in case something goes wrong, in a way that if, as we said before, maybe consumer sentiment is changing, maybe, we were all affected by the pandemic, certain things maybe you cannot do in the same way, so we have to kind of think, what are alternative strategies, alternative ways to get to the same goal. But I feel, especially when you start a company, if you basically always think, okay, there's a plan B, and if in 6 months or 1 year, then I'm going to maybe do something else if I'm not convinced of doing it. Then I feel like we will always be only kind of half-assed in there, and that doesn't work. It's
very true. Yeah, I'm definitely an all or nothing person, but all right. We're talking for another 30 minutes
we're
now.
We're already in the next discussion.
I love it. I just love my time with you. But again, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And I look forward to chatting with you again soon.
Yeah, thank you so
all
much.
Right. Bye.